our Q&A with some basic things. I'm going to get us started with some introductions and learning a little bit about you, your background, where you've been and what you've done. Paulo's going to talk a little bit about sourcing and purchasing, things that have come up here, since that's where he works. I think he's well positioned for that.
Sure.
Rich is going to ask some questions about supply chain in general. And then I'm corporate citizenship.
Okay.
And Serena's going to close out with some questions about sustainability.
Very good.
Okay?
Very good.
So let's get started then. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, your education, any professional certifications you have?
Sure. So I got my start in supply chain before the term was really popularized as a concept, and it's interesting over the last couple of decades to see how supply chain management as a discipline has grown in terms of the body of knowledge, the amount of resources that companies are putting in it. It wasn't too many decades ago that companies were typically domestically centric in terms of their manufacturing, supply, distribution, vertically integrated a lot of times, and a lot of that's gone very flat and international. And so my career spans a time where a lot of that has happened. I got my start out of college not really with a particular interest or knowledge of supply chain, but an interest in international logistics. I grew up, spent several of my years when I was a young child in Europe, and so things international kind of made sense to me. And I realized a couple of years out of college that there was this enormous transportation import-export business going on in the Chicago area because we're such a big transportation hub. So I started out in working in international freight forwarding, and from there have progressed into working for a company that was doing importing and needed skills there. But then I was able to learn from people there about sourcing and materials management and production inventory control, and then through a series of other companies, have sort of rounded what has now become a supply chain management career. So I kind of learned everything from ground up, doing things, learning things as I went, tapping interests of mine that's and just augmenting and building from there. So here I am. Along the way, so my education was in liberal arts, so it had nothing to do with the hard number crunching and things that I do now. But along the way, I've gotten two certifications through APICS, the Association for Operations Management. And interestingly enough, companies or organizations like ISM or APICS have also evolved in the last couple of decades with their course offerings. So, if you were to go take a course from them, their emphasis is a lot on supply chain management, integration of technologies, forecasting, demand management, inventory control, production, a lot of thinking broadly and across international and company boundaries. So that's been really useful for me in formalizing the experiences that I've had along the way.
Terrific. What kind of experiences stand out to you? Are there sort of hallmark moments or pinnacles at certain positions?
Yeah, I was very fortunate, I think, early in my career to land at a relatively young, rapidly growing company that has some really, I would say, exceptionally talented people in the sourcing area in particular. They took me under their wing, and that's what really kind of opened my eyes to the potential that a supply chain has to really make a company profitable and successful and powerful. We were a small company making lunch boxes and coolers. When I arrived, we were somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million a year, and we were going head to head with Brunswick and Igloo and Coleman and Rubbermaid and Igloo, and we were killing them. And it was because of the expertise that we had in-house of going to the source, working in factories. In this case, they happened to be offshore for the soft-sided part, but we did also use domestic manufacturing for the injection molding. So we had a blend of domestic and offshore sourcing expertise, and the fact that we were willing to invest in partnerships and do collaborative planning with those domestic and global partners put us in a position where our quality control was outstanding, our cost control was outstanding, and our speed to market was second to none. So we were bringing innovative products, and by the time I left, the company had tripled in size in about a 4-year period. So they were actually so successful that they actually got bought out, and the company got dismantled. And so I think I look at that experience as really formative because, like, again, it was a place where I was given an opportunity to expand my horizons, but also I got some incredibly good insight in how a supply chain isn't just part of the company's bottom line. It's part of the profit engine if it's utilized and leveraged well.
Excellent. What about a team or a project that you're most proud of?
I can think of a project that I did when I worked at Master Lock up in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, and it had to do with integration of our supply chain processes, demand management processes with our Canadian distribution arm. So we had a subsidiary company in Canada. They had been poorly developed in terms of integration into our ERP planning. They were not well integrated into flow of material that was coming from the United States. They were not integrated into our planning systems. They felt left out, but it was a big potential market up there. And I was given a project to work with them and see what I could do because everyone was kind of tired of listening to the squeaky wheel, and they weren't they weren't happy. And that was a fun project because it was really a matter of working with the people over a course of about a year to break down what their sales requirements were, convert that or translate that into forecasting, which they hadn't done in the past, show them how that process would work, and then link that to the inventory management systems that we had so that we could replenish them quicker with less inventory, and we were happy because they weren't taking big chunks of inventory that were kind of causing bullwhip effects in our manufacturing, and they were happy because they got what they needed, and and actually had more warehouse space that they could do other projects with. So it was a fun project, and I bring it up because that was one that I got to do front to back, and I was able to do a lot of the work myself.
Terrific.
So
what kind of experiences, and I know you've talked about some of them so far, but are there any specifics from your past experience that you really use in your role here? Can you talk a little bit about what your role is here and past experiences?
Sure. I think there have been learning experiences in every company I've worked with, and I think the biggest distinction between those experiences had to do with the size or the scale of the company. So, but I think common to all of those was the value of collaborative planning with in partnership, particularly with our suppliers, and so that's kind of an external external focus, but internally also the collaborative planning internally. So between departments, how and typically at the larger companies I've worked at, the functional silos that may exist, and how you work across those, how you break those down, how well are the metrics aligned between the different departments. So I learned a lot at the small startup company with the value of external partnership, because the internal part was pretty simple. It was a fairly flat, small organization. When I moved to bigger organizations, the challenges became more internal. So how do you figure out what, from a systems perspective or an information flow perspective or from a personality perspective, how do you work with other departments who may not seem to be on your side because their metrics are taken in different directions? How do you take that perspective, bring a perspective that says we can do better as an organization if we kind of all talk to each other and start to think more macro level about our total cost, or how effectively are we servicing our customer? How effectively is our processes managing the flow of orders, manufacturing, whatever it is that we're doing? Yeah, so those are key things that are brought here, and my role right now is in helping. I'm essentially a liaison, helping marketing, engineering, and operations and purchasing bring new product to market. So there's a huge gap that our company has had here as our supply chain has grown and gotten more sophisticated, and the process of bringing product has gotten a little more complicated just by the sheer timelines and sheer distance of the manufacturing base. How do you integrate that information back in and get everybody's needs met? So I'm directly applying all those lessons that learned in other companies in this role.
Paulo, how about if you talk about some sourcing and purchasing ideas?
How is that all these raw materials are being purchased? Do Xylem purchase the raw materials on the actual raw stage, or are being manufactured by 3PL or sourced by a third party, and then shipped back to the company to be assembled and then shipped out as a finished product?
So what's happening at Xylem is not untypical with which is happening in a lot of manufacturing companies. We're actually in the process of outsourcing a lot of the fabrication. At one point, this factory was almost entirely vertically integrated in terms of the different components that it manufactured to build a pump. We actually used to build the engines or the motors here. We would do all the fabrication of all the bases, all the piece parts, the metal work that was needed to do the pumps. Actually had some foundry work that was done here out in the back. And over time, the cost pressures of manufacturing and the specialization that's required now in a lot of the manufacturing has led us to outsource most of those operations. So right now, I think we still do some fabrication of some sheet steel here, but the last of that is departing the building. So all of that is now for the most part gone. We are mostly a final assembly fabrication or final assembly operation here where we just take the parts that have been outsourced and put them together in the various configurations that are our final products. So it's really more of an assembly house now, and that's why one of the reasons why our supply chain has gotten more complicated. So instead of just bringing the raw materials and doing it all in house, where you can go over and you can talk to the next department over and find out when the next shipment of something is due to a particular department or back to some focus factory. Now we're talking about going across town or across country or the other side of the world literally for some of those components.
Now, taking advantage of that situation, what happened when the raw materials, how the companies fighting the fluctuation on the prices? Is there a contract or there is a...
Yeah, so there's a couple of levels at which we address cost fluctuations, starting with our sourcing strategies. So we're typically always dual sourcing a component. In the past, it was always a domestic source with an international source if we were doing low-cost region manufacturing. The idea there is that we wanted to support domestic manufacturing because that's where our supply base originated. So that's where there was a lot of expertise and knowledge of tribal knowledge of among our suppliers of what we built and how we built it. That is changing. So now a lot of our manufacturing is being dual sourced offshore. So, but to answer your question, so the sourcing strategy, even when we're going offshore, we'll typically divide between India and China as opposed to doing all China or all India because of currency fluctuations. So if China's doing well and India's not doing well, or vice versa, that can have implications on the currency. So we're constantly, building the capability to be able to shift the proportion of manufacturing depending on what's going on there. We also have commodity manager positions here within the purchasing team whose sole responsibility is to look at long-term commodity pricing on, whether it's raw materials or manufactured components and of the key pieces that we use. Motors would be an example. So they use a lot of steel and use a lot of copper, and both of those commodities are very price sensitive right now in the market. So the range at which we're looking to control those might be anywhere from 6 months up to 2 years out. The more volatile ones we might revisit and reprice about every 6 months.
How the exports or imports are managed, how the documentation are controlled on the raw material in order to keep a right control from a right amount of materials coming to and from the suppliers.
Are you talking about the planning of it, or are you talking about the control, the customs end of it?
In both, actually.
Both.
We are interested in the raw materials,
Mm-hmm.
coming like, for example, China or
Mm-hmm.
India, like you mentioned,
Right.
and how those raw materials are controlled when they go out as a finished product.
Okay, so on the import side, we have, we rely heavily on our customs broker and the expertise of our customs broker and freight forwarder to help us with the duties and declarations of the imported material. We have the advantage that most of our materials are fairly common. They're not, the material content or the design isn't such that, we have to go into looking at value-added content of like multi-stage manufacturing. Most of what we're bringing are castings. We benefit from the fact that most of those are duty-free. So zero duty, which takes a lot of the necessity for more involved monitoring and control of the declarations. But essentially, they all fall within a fairly tight range of harmonized tariff codes that are used. So that makes the importation side fairly easy. The exportation side, we do have a dedicated specialist here on the site whose responsibility is just to work with the export orders. So all the paperwork, depending on where the material is going out, we do a lot of exports to the Middle East. So there's a whole range of special requirements that she handles on that.
And my very last question, how the local sourcing is working through different locations. Silent is known by making different products around the United States and worldwide. Mm-hmm. Is Silent using these local sources or always looking outsourced by the outsource?
Again, I think that the profile of our supply base is evolving and changing. We are known for our products of being of fairly premium quality. However, the cost pressures, the reality of the competitive landscape, there's a lot of cost pressures. So our products, we're going head to head with some very, very large international conglomerates, and that means that the sourcing decisions that are being made today are more focused on the low-cost region sourcing. I think that the reality also is that with our particular product, the materials that were traditionally made domestically, we're talking about castings, and foundry work is dirty, grimy, unsexy work. If you want to, and it's hard for us to find domestic companies that are continuing to invest in their infrastructure, in their equipment processes, unless it's really high end. And so our products are relatively low value castings, So it's really hard for us to grow business domestically or to find new sources domestically. Most of them are holding their own, or in some cases shrinking in terms of volume. So as our business grows, we're really forced to start looking overseas for the cost efficiencies.
Thank you so much for your answers. Passing on, Rich.
What would you consider one of Xylem's greatest supply chain success stories in the last year?
Okay, so here's one that I've been involved in, and it's not so much a success story in terms of what we've been able to demonstrate, like a product brought to market yet, but what we have done is invested a lot of focus in the last year at developing what we call our SDEs, our supplier development engineers, who work in country in China and India. And what I bring this up because this is really setting the table for allowing our company to be successful in the new international globally sourced arena, where in the past we dealt with our suppliers almost at arm's length. We're now investing in our own staff in country who can be our eyes and ears on the ground with the manufacturing base that we're developing there. And it's actually been pretty neat to see the people who we've hired grow, develop, start to understand kind of our business philosophy and be our partners. So this is a big win for us because it's going to allow us, as we go forward, to have much better quality control, much better communication directly with the factories we're working, allow us to not rely on intermediary representatives of factories that may have their own interests in mind, and actually slow down the communication process. So this is something that, like I said, we're doing to set the table for growth and success in the future.
What is Xylem's approach to the complexity of various international regulations and that strategy's impact on the supply chain? For example, like electrical standards differ from country to country. How does Xylem deal with that? Do you come up with standard components that can fit multiple needs, or are you more focused in design applications for specific countries?
The design, there's two, I would say there's two strategies right now, two parallel strategies. For the Martin Grove operation and for North Americas in general, most of our product, far and away the majority of our product, is designed with the intention for domestic use. So, it's a huge proportion of our business actually stays right here in the States. So having said that, the power source for our pumps will come either in the form of an engine or a motor. Motors being electric driven, engines being fuel driven. We do design our product for use in Canada, Mexico, as two of our immediate adjoining markets. But what we've done there is we've divorced the power source from our domestic supply. So, for example, in Canada, we'll build the pump, send it to Canada either as a kit or as an unfinished pump. Canada will source their own motors according to their own local specifications for having to do with electrical. And we've got global agreements with motor suppliers, but the specific specifications they need to comply with, we allow Canada to deal with. And the same actually happens with Mexico. We ship them kits. They source the key components that the local regulations are going to regulate and have product comply with their local regulations. We allow them to do that. So that's one path. There is an initiative with our global corporate organization to start developing some pump platforms that can be universal, and those are relatively new. We've had a couple of launches with those, but that's and that will be limited to a certain number of applications. there's certain kinds of pumps that will work globally, if you can imagine, that can be scaled up or scaled down. But because of certain requirements that are or peculiarities to water pumping that might be have to do with the gauging of or the sizing of the pumps, we still allow local applications. So there is this global initiative to try to roll out more of these global platforms. It's been successful, but so far it's been relatively limited.
Okay, does Xylem experience any quality issues or market loss due to counterfeit components? Do you have any issues with that?
Okay, so fortunately, our product doesn't lend itself too much to counterfeit manufacturing.
Being lower cost?
Well, the components, even though we're talking about low-cost sourcing, I mean, they're relatively complicated to make. It's not anybody who's got like a foundry in their backyard that can make a casting, low cost, and then what do you do with it? Because by itself, it doesn't really work unless it's been built into a pump. So, pumps are fairly complicated, assemblies with hundreds of parts. So by the time you've done all if you were inclined to try to counterfeit a pump, by the time you've invested all the energy to do it, you probably aren't going to have come out with something that's particularly cost competitive. So from that perspective, we're fairly insulated from that issue.
Is Xylem implementing any sort of track and trace technology or some way to gain visibility farther along in the supply chain, where parts are coming from, where raw materials are coming from?
I would say that's limited to with our purchase order processes. We're trying to leverage the technology that we have available to us right now to do more of barcoding, so that when we release orders, I mean, this is like level 1 track and trace. But when we issue a PO, that the vendor can print a barcode that they can put on their shipment, and so when it rolls in, we can just scan it into our inventory. We're not in it by any stretch, into the more sophisticated level 2, level 3 kinds of lot tracing type activities. We're not at the point where frankly we need that. But we'd be happy if we had maybe just a little bit better PO tracking.
Yeah. Does Xylem have a recovery plan in place in case there's a catastrophic interruption of the supply chain?
I would say that's rolled, to the extent that we have one, it's really rolled into that dual sourcing strategy. So we're always trying to maintain 2 viable, substantial suppliers in different continents, whether it's domestic and overseas, or if it's going to be overseas, that we're coming from 2 different sources, at least 2 different countries, so that if anything did disrupt, like natural disasters, you'd have a backup source.
What is the cost difference between both overseas sourcing and domestic sourcing?
Surprisingly, overseas sourcing is probably about anywhere from 20 to 40% cheaper right now. Yeah. A lot of it's labor related, and the fact that, like I pointed out before, the fact that a lot of the domestic sources for our materials, they don't have a tremendous incentive to invest in expansion. So they're limited by the scale of operation. That's another cost.
So let's talk a little bit about corporate citizenship for Xylem.
Sure.
Understanding that you do dual sourcing, you try to mitigate risks for natural disasters. What about things like military conflict, or dealing with things like political corruption in the different markets where you're sourcing materials?
We've, fortunately with our selection of India and China, we've been able to avoid the military conflicts. As we discussed earlier in the conversation, though, there's always opportunities for local corruption. I think that one of the things that Xylem really emphasizes with our corporate code of ethics is that we take great lengths to avoid those kinds of situations. So whether it's establishing the expectations with our vendors, overseas vendors, establishing online certifications that everyone in the supply chain is required to take, so that we've all been coached on, you know, what are appropriate business practices with our vendors, you know, avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. Also the fact that with our overseas vendors, where we're perhaps most likely to encounter that kind of those kinds of issues, we often buy, or mostly buy, our product already landed. So the transactions that are taking place internally in country, we're typically not a party to at any rate. So most of those, if that's going on, it's the local supplier who's dealing it with it on almost a cultural level. It affords us, frankly, a little bit of insulation from that. It puts us in a position where we don't have to deal with that. But nevertheless, when we do go to another country and we are vetting potential suppliers, we do make sure that they understand this is the way we do business, and that we don't engage or encourage that kind of practice.
Okay. Something that caught our eye when we were looking at the website and reading a little bit about Xylem is that sort of at a corporate level, there's this initiative to bring potable water to different places, sort of use your pumps for good, not just to make money, but to actually bring water to people who need it, third world places, you know, hard to reach places. Do you know much about that program? How did that initiative get started, and what keeps it going?
That predated my arrival here by about 4 or 5 years. I do know that in about 2008 is when we kind of got involved heavily in trying to reach out to charitable organizations, relief organizations globally, that we could work with to leverage the water technology that this company builds for good purposes. So I know, for example, that we do, you know, we have foot pumps that are low cost, highly effective, you know, essentially don't require a power source other than a human being to stand on them, you know, that we can deploy in areas that are starved for water. If the water is in the ground, they just need a way to extract it, you know, that's a simple win for us. There's been a lot of emphasis, not so much on our business practices, but in the orientation of the company to try to reach out and invest externally, and kind of give back, if you would, give back to the world a little bit. But I would say that's you know, at the corporate level they're doing a lot of that. At the site level, you know, we don't. It's not part of our daily you know, work routines to be a part of that. But certainly at the corporate level, they encourage employee participation, and they are definitely investing some big dollars in that.
We have heard that Xylem has taken some sustainability and green initiatives. So what benefits has the Xylem has seen so far, and do you allocate a separate budget for this green initiative, and what has been the response of your stakeholders regarding this?
So part of that question I can answer, and part of it, frankly, I have to defer, because I'm not totally in the know about what some of the upcoming plans are. The green initiatives that we've invested in have mostly to do with the product engineering. We do some things here with recycling of our packaging materials, so the returnable dunnage. We do attempt to do some in-office recycling of our material here. And beyond that, frankly, on a day-to-day operations level, that's about the extent to which we're doing.
Okay. Thank you.